I did not plan to come home that late on Christmas Eve. The roads were slow, the snow had started coming down harder than the forecast promised, and by the time I pulled onto my parents' street, the dashboard clock read 9:42 p.m. The trunk of my car was packed tight with gifts I had carefully budgeted for over the past few months, wrapped in paper I thought my nieces would like, plus a couple of bottles of wine I knew my dad pretended not to care about, but always drank anyway. Snow clung to my coat when I stepped out of the car, the cold biting through my gloves. And for a second, I just stood there, breathing out fog and looking at the house I grew up in. All the windows were dark. No tree lights. No music. No shadows moving behind the curtains. Just one yellow glow coming from the kitchen. That should have been my first warning. I am David, 32 years old, and I live about 3 hours away from my family now. Not far enough to be the distant relative, but far enough that I'm not part of the everyday rhythm anymore. I come home for major holidays, birthdays if I can manage it, and the occasional weekend when guilt gets loud enough to override my common sense. Christmas has always been non-negotiable. At least, that's what I told myself every year, even when it felt like I was putting in more effort than anyone else seemed to notice. I unlocked the front door quietly, more out of habit than intention, and stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of cold food and cleaning spray, like someone had rushed through after a gathering and tried to erase the evidence. My boots left wet marks on the entryway rug. I called out a soft hello, expecting someone to answer, maybe my mom from the living room or my sister from upstairs. No one did. The kitchen light was on, harsh and unwelcoming, and that's where I saw my uncle. He was sitting at the table in his winter jacket, hunched over a plate of what looked like leftover stuffing, eating it straight from the dish with a fork. The turkey platter was empty on the counter, foil loosely draped over it like an afterthought. He looked up when he heard me, froze for half a second, and then gave me a look that was equal parts awkward and annoyed, as if I had interrupted something inconvenient. "Oh," he said. Then, after a pause, "They didn't tell you?" Those 4 words landed harder than the cold. I stood there, still wearing my coat, still holding my car keys, snow melting down my collar, trying to process what he meant. Tell me what? That dinner had already happened? That everyone had left early? That I had misread the plan entirely? My uncle went back to his stuffing like the conversation was over, like whatever I had missed was obvious and not worth explaining. "Tell me what?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He shrugged, a small, careless movement. "Guess you just missed it." Missed it. Christmas Eve dinner. The thing we had talked about 2 weeks ago on the phone. The thing my mom had said would start later this year, so I could drive in after work. I glanced at the counter again. The sink was full of dishes. The trash was overflowing with crumpled wrapping paper and napkins. This wasn't a small gathering that ended early. This was Christmas. Without me. I checked my phone, suddenly aware of how quiet the house was. No missed calls. No texts. Nothing that said plans had changed or that I should not bother rushing. My last message from my sister, sent that morning, was a simple drive safe. That was it. I asked where everyone was, and my uncle gestured vaguely with his fork. "Your parents went to bed. Your sister left with the kids. Long day, you know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I always knew how it was. Things happened, decisions got made, and I was expected to adjust without complaint. I stood there for another minute, feeling ridiculous with my gifts still in the car, then muttered something about unpacking and went upstairs to the room that used to be mine. The bed was made too neatly, like a guest room. The little desk where I used to do homework was gone, replaced with a treadmill no one used. I sat down and stared at the wall for a long time. The next morning, Christmas Day, was polite. Too polite. Everyone acted like nothing unusual had happened. My mom hugged me and said, "Oh good, you made it," like I had arrived exactly when expected. My sister handed me a mug of coffee and talked about traffic. No one mentioned the night before unless I did, and when I tried, the answers were vague. "We thought you were coming later. It got so cold, we didn't want to wait. We assumed you'd understand." That word again. Assumed. I gave out my gifts anyway. I smiled in the photos. I laughed at the jokes I had heard my entire life. But something had shifted. I felt like a guest who overstayed, not a son or a brother. When I left 2 days later, no one asked when I'd be back. For days after that, my phone started buzzing. It began with a missed call from my sister. Then a text from my mom asking if I had a minute to talk. Then another call, this time from my dad. I was at work, in the middle of a meeting, and I watched the notifications stack up like they were suddenly urgent in a way I apparently hadn't been. When I finally stepped outside and called back, my mom answered immediately, her voice tight and overly cheerful at the same time. She said they needed my help with something important. She didn't explain what, only that it would be easier if I came back home for a few days. My sister texted separately, saying, "Please call me. It's about the house." The house. The same house that had gone dark on Christmas Eve without a second thought for whether I was inside it or not. I stood there in the cold, phone pressed to my ear, watching my breath fog up the air again, and for the first time in a long while, I did not rush to reassure them. I did not say yes right away. I told my mom I would think about it, which earned a pause on the line so long I could hear her breathing. That pause told me more than her words ever had. I did not go back right away. That alone seemed to confuse them. For most of my adult life, I had been predictable in one very specific way. When my family needed something, I showed up. It did not matter if it cost me time, money, or sleep. I rearranged work schedules. I drove long distances on short notice. I absorbed inconvenience quietly and told myself that this was just how family worked. So when I told my mom I needed a day or two to think, her silence carried more weight than any argument could have. The next 24 hours were a steady drip of pressure. My sister sent another text, longer this time, explaining that things were a bit complicated and that everyone was stressed. My dad left a voicemail saying it would mean a lot to him if I could come by. My uncle, the same one I had found eating cold stuffing in the kitchen, sent me a message that simply said, "We could really use you right now." No explanation. No acknowledgement of how strange it was that I had apparently gone from an afterthought to a necessity in the span of 4 days. I agreed to come back for the weekend. Part of me wanted answers. Another part of me, the older, more exhausted part, wanted to see how far this pattern would go if I stopped smoothing the edges for them. I packed light this time. No gifts. No extras. Just a bag and my laptop, in case work followed me home. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked different. Not physically, not in any obvious way, but there was a tension in the air that I felt before I even turned off the engine. My mom met me at the door almost immediately, like she had been watching through the window. She hugged me too tightly and too briefly, then stepped back and said, "We're so glad you're here," in a tone that sounded more like relief than affection. Inside, everyone was already gathered. My sister sat at the dining table with her laptop open, papers spread out around her like she was studying for an exam. My dad stood near the window, arms crossed, staring out into the yard even though there was nothing to see. My uncle was there too, leaning against the counter, arms folded, watching me like I was late for something important. No one asked how the drive was. We did not sit down right away. That was another thing that stood out. Usually, there was coffee or at least the suggestion of it. This time, my mom went straight to the point. She said they needed help sorting out some paperwork related to the house. She said it casually, like it was a small administrative inconvenience, but the way my sister avoided eye contact told a different story. "What kind of paperwork?" I asked. There was a pause. Not the same kind as before, but close. My dad finally turned around and said something about refinancing. My sister jumped in quickly, talking over him, explaining that interest rates were changing and that it made sense to adjust things now rather than later. The words came fast, rehearsed. I had the distinct impression that this explanation had been practiced. I listened. I nodded. I asked careful questions. The answers were vague. Too vague. Eventually, my sister slid a document across the table toward me. "We just need you to look this over," she said. "You're good with this kind of thing. I am not a lawyer. I am not a financial expert. But I am the only one in my family who reads contracts all the way through. I have always been that person. The one who asks inconvenient questions, who notices clauses everyone else skips. Growing up, they used to joke that I was paranoid. As an adult, they called it being thorough, but only when it benefited them. I skimmed the first page, then the second. My name was there. Not just as a witness. Not just as an emergency contact. As a guarantor. I looked up slowly. Why is my name on this? My sister smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Oh, that's just a formality. The bank wanted someone with good credit on file." A formality. The same word they used for forgetting to tell me Christmas dinner had started without me. I kept reading. The document was not just about refinancing. It was about restructuring ownership. The house. The same house my parents had always talked about as the family home. The same house I had helped pay for repairs on over the years. The same house I had assumed, perhaps foolishly, would eventually be split evenly, or at least discussed openly. The plan, as it was written, transferred the majority of the equity to my sister. Not immediately, but gradually, through a series of adjustments that would make it nearly impossible to undo later. My role was to back the loan and absorb the risk without gaining any of the benefit. I asked them, calmly, why this was being done without my knowledge. My mom sighed and said something about my sister needing stability. She mentioned the kids. She said it just made sense. My dad added that I was doing well on my own, that I did not need the house the way my sister did. My uncle nodded along, as if this was all obvious and reasonable. I reminded them that no one had talked to me about this before, that I had not been part of the conversation, that my name was being used in a way that could affect my financial future. My sister's tone shifted then. The warmth dropped away. She said I was overreacting. She said I was making things difficult. She said, "This is why we didn't want to bring it up earlier. You always turn things into a big deal." That sentence hurt more than I expected, not because it was new, but because it confirmed something I had been trying not to see for years. They had not forgotten to include me. They had chosen not to. The argument escalated slowly, like water heating on a stove. No one raised their voice at first. They repeated themselves. They minimized my concerns. They reframed my hesitation as selfishness. My mom said I should be grateful they trusted me enough to ask. My dad said family does not nickel and dime each other. My sister said, we all make sacrifices. I asked what sacrifice she was making. That is when the room went quiet. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment I thought she might soften. Instead, she said, "You don't even live here anymore. You barely show up. Why should you have a say?" There it was. The thing that had been sitting beneath every interaction, every assumption, every exclusion. I was useful when I was convenient, invisible when I was not. I stood up and told them I was not signing anything until I had time to review it properly. I said I would talk to someone independent. I said this calmly, without accusation. I expected pushback. What I did not expect was how quickly the tone turned. My uncle scoffed and said I was holding everyone hostage. My sister accused me of trying to sabotage her family. My mom's voice shook as she said she did not understand how I could do this to them after everything they had done for me. My dad stayed quiet, which in some ways was worse. Then my sister said it. Not loudly, not angrily, almost casually. "If you don't help us with this," she said, "we'll have to rethink how involved you are with the family. We can't keep planning around someone who isn't really committed." Rethink how involved I was. Like I was a subscription they could cancel. I looked around the room and realized that this was not a negotiation. It was an ultimatum. They had already decided what they wanted. My presence here was not about discussion or fairness. It was about pressure, about leveraging guilt and obligation until I complied. I gathered my things and told them I needed air. I went outside, stood in the cold again, just like I had on Christmas Eve, and tried to steady my breathing. Snow crunched under my shoes. The house behind me was warm and bright, full of people who claimed to love me. A few minutes later, my dad came out. He put a hand on my shoulder and said quietly, "You know this would make things easier for everyone." I asked him if he thought it was fair. He hesitated, then said, "Fair isn't always the point." That was the moment something in me finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a clean, sharp crack, like ice giving way underfoot. I nodded, told him I understood, and went back inside to collect my bag. As I was heading toward the door, my sister called after me and said, "Don't make this a bigger problem than it needs to be." I did not respond. Later that night, alone in a hotel room a few miles away, I opened my laptop and started reading the document again, more carefully this time. The deeper I went, the clearer it became that this was not just about convenience or helping family. There were dates, clauses, and signatures already in place that suggested this plan had been in motion long before Christmas, long before anyone pretended to need my input. There was one page, buried near the end, that made my stomach drop. A section that referenced an agreement I had supposedly consented to months earlier, an agreement I had never seen. I stared at my own name printed neatly at the bottom of the page, next to a signature that looked just close enough to mine to pass at a glance. And that was when I realized this was no longer about being overlooked or taken for granted. This was something else entirely. I did not sleep that night. I lay on the stiff hotel mattress staring at the ceiling, replaying everything over and over again, like my brain was convinced that if it ran the footage enough times, some hidden explanation would appear. Something reasonable, something that made it all make sense. But every time I reached the part with the document, with my name and that almost my signature, my chest tightened all over again. By morning, the shock had settled into something heavier. I called in sick to work. I told my manager I had a family emergency, which was technically true, even if I did not yet have the language to describe it. I ordered coffee I barely drank and sat at the small desk by the window, laptop open, document pulled up again. In daylight, without the emotional noise of the night before, it was even worse. The structure of it, the timing, the way my involvement was framed as a given, not a request. This had not been thrown together in a panic after Christmas. This had been planned. That realization hit me harder than the confrontation itself. I had spent years believing that I was accidentally overlooked, that the slights were unintentional, the exclusions just poor communication. Seeing how methodical this was forced me to confront a truth I had avoided. I was not forgotten. I was being used. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Not someone connected to the family. Not a friend of a friend. Someone neutral. I sent the document over and waited. When she called me back, her tone was careful, professional, but there was an edge there that made my stomach drop. She told me there were serious issues. She told me I should not sign anything. She told me that if the signature was not mine, then I needed to be very careful about what I did next. She also told me something that stayed with me long after the call ended. The fact that they had brought this to me now suggested they were running out of options. I went back to my apartment that evening feeling hollowed out. The drive was a blur. When I got home, I dropped my bag by the door and sat on the floor with my back against the couch, staring at nothing. I did not call anyone. I did not answer texts. I let my phone buzz until it went quiet. That was the lowest point. Not the anger, not the betrayal, the emptiness afterward. The moment when the image I had carried of my family for 3 decades finally collapsed, and there was nothing underneath it to soften the fall. The next few weeks were rough. I stopped sleeping properly. I replayed conversations from years ago with new context, seeing patterns I had dismissed at the time. The jokes about me being the reliable one. The comments about how I did not need help because I was good on my own. The way my contributions were treated as expected, not appreciated. My family noticed my withdrawal quickly. The messages shifted tone. At first, they were concerned, then confused, then irritated. My sister sent long texts explaining how stressed she was. My mom left voicemails that alternated between guilt and reassurance. My dad sent a single message that said, "We need to talk like adults." I did not respond. Instead, I focused on getting through each day. I went to work. I met deadlines. I smiled when necessary. On the outside, I was functional. On the inside, I was quietly dismantling the version of myself that had believed loyalty meant self-sacrifice without limits. One night, while sorting through old files on my computer, I found a folder labeled Family. Inside were scanned receipts, bank transfers, emails, things I had saved over the years without much thought, money I had sent for repairs, payments I had made when someone came up short, messages thanking me for bailing us out again. I stared at that folder for a long time. For the first time, I did not see it as evidence of my generosity. I saw it as a record, a timeline, proof that my involvement had not been casual or occasional. It had been consistent, substantial, measurable. Something shifted then. I stopped thinking in terms of what I had lost and started thinking in terms of what I still controlled. I began rebuilding quietly, methodically. I updated my financial records. I locked down my credit. I pulled my reports and flagged anything unfamiliar. I followed the lawyer's advice and documented everything. Dates, messages, calls. I stopped engaging emotionally and started observing. The distance gave me clarity. Without the constant pull of family expectations, I had time. Time to think. Time to rest. Time to notice how much mental energy I had been spending on managing other people's comfort. I started going to the gym again, not to punish myself, but to burn off the restless energy that had nowhere else to go. I slept better. I ate better. I stopped apologizing for things that were not my fault. Work became a refuge. I took on a project I had been hesitant about before, something that required focus and confidence. I did well. My manager noticed. Opportunities opened up. Small ones at first, then bigger. Nothing dramatic, but steady. Real. My family, meanwhile, grew more insistent. The requests returned, dressed up as concern. My mom asked if I was okay. My sister asked if we could talk things out. My uncle sent another message about clearing the air. None of them mentioned the document directly. None of them acknowledged the signature. It was as if they believed that if they avoided the issue long enough, I would step back into my old role without question. I did not. The real turning point came on a quiet Tuesday evening, weeks later. I was making dinner when my phone rang. My sister's name flashed on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She told me they were having issues with the bank. She said the refinancing was stalled. She said everyone was stressed. Then she said, "We really need you to stop dragging this out." I asked her, calmly, if she wanted to explain the signature. There was a pause. A long one. She said she did not know what I was talking about. I told her I had spoken to a lawyer. I told her I had a copy of the document. I told her I knew the agreement referenced something I had never seen. I did not accuse her directly. I did not raise my voice. I just stated facts. Her tone changed instantly. She accused me of threatening the family. She said I was blowing things out of proportion. She said I was trying to scare them. She said, "You always think you're smarter than everyone else." That comment, oddly enough, did not hurt. It clarified. I told her I would not be involved in anything further unless everything was transparent and in writing. I told her all communication should go through my lawyer. Then I hung up. After that, the messages slowed. The silence that followed was different from before. Not empty. Protective. I realized I was no longer waiting for their approval. I was no longer hoping for an apology. I was standing on my own ground for the first time, and it felt steadier than I expected. But the story was not over. Because while I had been rebuilding my sense of self, my family had been doing something else entirely. Something I did not find out about until a few days later, when an unexpected email landed in my inbox. An email that made my hands go cold as I read the subject line and recognized the sender. It was not from my parents. It was not from my sister. It was from the bank. And it made one thing very clear. They had decided to move forward without me anyway. I read the email 3 times before it fully registered. It was written in the polite, carefully neutral language banks specialize in. The kind that sounds helpful while quietly informing you that something serious is already in motion. It referenced an account number I recognized immediately. It referenced a property address I knew by heart. And it referenced my name as if my involvement were settled, finalized, assumed. I closed my laptop and sat very still. For a few minutes, I felt that old instinct flare up again. The urge to call, to demand explanations, to force a confrontation that would make them admit what they were doing. That was the version of me they expected. The one who reacted emotionally, who made noise, who gave them something to push back against. Instead, I did nothing. I let the email sit. I did not reply. I did not forward it. I did not alert my family that I knew. That choice marked the beginning of something new. The next day, I called my lawyer again. I sent her the email. I asked her, very calmly, what my options were. She asked me a few pointed questions, then told me something that made me lean back in my chair and stare at the ceiling. She said that if they were moving forward using my name without my consent, they were making a mistake. Not a small one. A structural one. That word stayed with me. Structural. For the first time since Christmas, I felt something other than hurt or anger. I felt control. Over the next few weeks, I moved carefully, quietly. I stopped thinking in terms of reacting and started thinking in terms of positioning. I gathered documents. I requested records. I made timelines. I built a clean, organized file that told a story very different from the one my family liked to tell themselves. I learned things during that process, things they never intended for me to see. I learned that the refinancing attempt had been denied once already. I learned that my sister's credit was not nearly as solid as she claimed. I learned that my parents had quietly co-signed other obligations for her over the years, obligations that were now catching up with them. The house was not just a sentimental asset. It was leverage, and that leverage was slipping. I also learned why the timing mattered so much. There was a deadline approaching, one they had not mentioned, one that explained the sudden urgency, the pressure, the emotional manipulation. They did not need my help eventually. They needed it now. That knowledge changed everything. I did not confront them. I did not warn them. I let them believe I was still wavering, still conflicted, Still the same David who would eventually cave if pushed hard enough. When my mom texted asking if we could just talk things through, I replied politely but vaguely. When my dad asked if I had reconsidered, I said I was still thinking. When my sister sent a long message about how much stress this was putting on her kids, I did not respond at all. Silence, I learned, was more unsettling to them than anger ever had been. Behind the scenes, I continued to strengthen my position. I froze my credit completely. I set alerts on everything. I authorized my lawyer to communicate on my behalf without looping me into every minor update. I stopped being emotionally available and became administratively precise. At the same time, my life outside of them continued to improve in ways I had not expected. Work picked up momentum. The project I had taken on earlier gained attention from higher up. I was asked to present my work to a larger group. I was offered a role that came with more responsibility and, quietly, more leverage of my own. I accepted without hesitation. There was a strange symmetry to it. As my family's sense of entitlement over me weakened, my confidence elsewhere solidified. I also started talking, cautiously, to people I trusted. Not to complain, not to vent, just to test my understanding of what was happening. A colleague who had gone through a messy family estate dispute listened and nodded knowingly. A friend who worked in finance confirmed that nothing about the way my family was handling this was normal. Each conversation stripped away another layer of doubt. I was not imagining things. They were escalating. The shift became impossible to ignore when the tone of their messages changed again. The warmth disappeared entirely. Concern gave way to irritation, then resentment. My mom accused me of shutting them out. My sister said I was punishing everyone for a misunderstanding. My uncle sent a message that was less subtle than the rest, suggesting that if I did not cooperate, things could get complicated. That one made me laugh. Not out loud, just a short, humorless breath through my nose. Complicated was exactly what this was becoming, just not in the way they thought. The real opportunity presented itself unexpectedly. One afternoon, I received a call from a number I did not recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. The woman on the other end introduced herself as a representative from the bank. She asked if I had a moment to discuss an outstanding issue related to an application. I told her I did. She explained, carefully, that there were discrepancies they needed clarification on, specifically regarding my consent. She asked if I had authorized the use of my name and credit for the application in question. I told her the truth. No, there was a pause. Not an awkward one. A professional one. The kind that signals a line has been crossed. She thanked me for my time and said they would be in touch. When the call ended, I sat there for a long moment, phone still in my hand, heart beating steadily. Not racing, not pounding, just steady. That was when I realized I was no longer on the defensive. They were. I did not tell my family about the call. I let them continue operating under the assumption that I was indecisive, slow, unsure. Meanwhile, I prepared. I met with my lawyer in person for the first time. We went through everything step by step. She explained potential outcomes, timelines, consequences. She did not promise revenge. She promised clarity, accountability, boundaries. I also made a personal decision during that meeting, one that had nothing to do with contracts or credit. I decided that whatever happened next, I would not rush. For years, my family had controlled the tempo. They decided when things mattered, when urgency was justified, when my involvement was required. I had always adjusted to match them. This time, they would adjust to me. A few days later, my sister showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was surprised, but not unprepared. She looked tired. Not stressed tired. Cornered tired. She tried to smile, but it did not hold. She asked if we could talk. I let her in, offered her a seat, and waited. She launched into an explanation that sounded rehearsed but frayed around the edges. She said things had gotten out of hand. She said there had been miscommunication. She said she never meant for things to feel this way. She said, "You know how mom and dad get." I listened. I did not interrupt. Then she said something that changed the tone of the entire conversation. She said, "We assumed you wouldn't actually push back." There it was again. Assumed. I asked her, calmly, what would have happened if I had not noticed the signature. She did not answer right away. When she finally did, she said, "It wouldn't have mattered." That honesty, unintentional as it was, told me everything I needed to know. I told her, politely, that I would not be discussing this directly anymore. I told her all communication should go through legal channels. I walked her to the door. As she left, she turned and said, "You're really going to do this to us?" I did not respond. After she was gone, I sat down and felt something settle into place. Not satisfaction, not anger, certainty. They had underestimated me. Not because I was weak, but because I had been accommodating for so long that they mistook kindness for compliance. In the days that followed, the pressure intensified. Missed calls, long messages, attempts to appeal to nostalgia, to obligation, to fear. I let them stack up unanswered. Because at that point, I was no longer preparing to defend myself. I was waiting for the moment when everything they had tried to rush would finally catch up with them. And I knew, with a calm I had never felt before, that moment was very close. The call from the bank came on a Thursday morning. Not the polite clarification call this time. This one was direct. The representative explained that the application had been formally suspended. Not delayed, not under review. Suspended. She said that due to inconsistencies in authorization and documentation, the matter had been escalated internally. She said my name had been removed from any pending filings. She said, very carefully, that if further attempts were made to involve me without consent, the bank would be required to take additional steps. When I hung up, I did not feel relief. I felt finality. That afternoon, my lawyer forwarded me a copy of a notice she had sent on my behalf. It was clean, factual, and impossible to misinterpret. It stated that I did not consent to the use of my name, credit, or financial standing in any past or future agreements. It stated that any documents bearing my name without my explicit authorization were disputed. It stated that all communication regarding the matter should go through her office. No threats, no emotion, just boundaries, written in ink. The fallout was immediate. My sister called first. She did not leave a voicemail. She hung up and called again. And again. When I did not answer, she started texting, the messages coming fast enough that my phone buzzed continuously on the table. I did not read them right away. I waited until they stopped. Then my mom called. Her voice, when I finally answered, was different. The warmth was gone. The confidence was gone. She asked what I had done, not what I was doing. What I had done, as if something irreversible had already occurred. I told her, calmly, that I had protected myself. She said I had embarrassed the family. She said people were asking questions. She said my sister was in tears. She said my father had not slept. She said, "How could you do this to us?" That question used to break me. This time it did not. I told her I had been given no choice. I told her I had been excluded, misled, and nearly implicated in something I did not agree to. I told her I had tried to slow things down, to talk it through, and had been met with pressure instead. I told her I would not be responsible for fixing a situation I had not created. She went quiet. Then she said something that finally confirmed what I had suspected all along. She said, "We didn't think you'd actually follow through." I ended the call shortly after that. The house situation unraveled faster than I expected. Without my credit, the refinancing collapsed entirely. The deadlines they had been racing against came due. Options disappeared. The bank required explanations they could not give without admitting what they had tried to do. My parents were forced to confront the reality of the risk they had taken on for my sister over the years. The quiet obligations, the co-signed loans, the extensions they assumed would never matter. They mattered now. The stress in the family turned inward. My sister blamed my parents for not handling things sooner. My parents blamed my sister for putting them in this position. My uncle stopped offering opinions entirely once it became clear there was no easy fix. The unity they had relied on when pressuring me fractured under actual consequences. I watched all of this from a distance. I did not gloat. I did not insert myself. I did not offer solutions. I did not say, "I told you so." I let the situation run its course, exactly as it had been set in motion long before I was ever asked to be involved. A few weeks later, my dad reached out. He asked if we could meet, just the two of us. We sat in a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. He looked older than I remembered. Not frail, just worn. He did not order anything. He stared at his hands for a long time before speaking. He told me they were going to have to sell the house. Not immediately, but soon. He told me they had no other viable option. He told me my sister was furious. He told me my mom felt betrayed. He told me he wished things had been different. I listened. Then I told him something I had never said out loud before. I told him that I had spent years trying to earn a place in the family I already belonged to. I told him that being reliable had turned into being expected. I told him that love should not come with conditions or ultimatums. I told him that I had been hurt long before any paperwork entered the picture. He nodded. He did not argue. When we stood to leave, he asked if there was any way to fix things. I told him honesty would have been a start. We did not hug. After that, the contact slowed to a trickle. My sister stopped calling entirely. My uncle avoided me. My mom sent a few messages that read like apologies, but never quite crossed the line into accountability. I responded politely, briefly, when I responded at all. Life settled into a new rhythm. Work continued to improve. I moved into the new role fully and discovered that the confidence I had built during the past few months carried over naturally. I trusted my judgment more. I spoke up when something felt wrong. I no longer confused discomfort with obligation. I also did something symbolic, though I did not tell anyone about it. I deleted that old folder on my computer, the one labeled family, not out of spite, out of closure. I no longer needed a record of what I had given. I knew my worth now without receipts. The last interaction came quietly. An envelope arrived in the mail one afternoon, forwarded from my parents' address. Inside was a short note from my mother. No excuses, no guilt, just a single sentence written carefully, as if she had rewritten it several times. I wish we had treated you better. I sat with that sentence for a long time. Then I folded the paper, placed it back in the envelope, and put it away. Not as proof, not as leverage. As a reminder, Christmas came again the following year. I did not go home. I spent it with friends, in a warm apartment filled with laughter and unspoken understanding. I brought gifts because I wanted to, not because I felt I had to. When I left that night, the lights were still on behind me, and no one wondered where I was. Sometimes, I think back to that first night. The snow on my coat, the dark house, my uncle eating cold stuffing under a single kitchen light. I remember how small I felt standing there, keys in my hand, realizing I had arrived somewhere I was no longer expected. And I am grateful, because that was the night I stopped waiting to be included and started choosing where I belonged.